up on levels. You see the recordings just started. Okay. I'll just take that off my screen. So we're going to see higher levels of warming in the future, and these heat waves becoming more frequent. And we have got to move now to start doing things about it. Now, the climate scientists have been telling us, and I've been working on a report, which I will come to later on with a number of scientists, that 1.5 or 2 degrees is potentially not even going to keep us safe. Now, we're trucking on our way towards 1.5 degrees at the moment, and many climate scientists say, actually, we need to keep well under 1.5 degrees to keep us safe, to stop ourselves going through onto tipping points and starting to tip the world into a pathway that we don't want it on, and that it can be uncontrollably heating up. The carbon and heat already trapped in the seas, if that is released, coming out from methane under the oceans, carbon dioxide that's already been absorbed, if that comes out, it could also be, I mean, climate science is suggesting that could also give us half a degree of warming on its own, even if we stop the other things we're doing. Now, the IPCC 6th assessment report, the one that's just come out, it's telling us that there's going to be abrupt changes, that tipping points are possible. We can see rapid Arctic sheet deterioration, forest dieback. And Ed Hawkins, so from one of the not so far away universities, Professor Ed Hawkins from the University of Reading, and he said, we're already experiencing climate change, including more frequent and extreme weather events. And then he told a press briefing that the consequences will continue to get worse for every bit of warming. And read for that, every gram of carbon we allow to go into the atmosphere. And there's going to be no going back. The latest assessment report from the IPCC says that we're going to reach 1.5 degrees sometime between 2027 and 2035. Those are, whatever the pathways we're on, we're very, very likely to hit 1.5 degrees by then. And this is going up 10 years earlier on average than another assessment report done in 2018. So in the course of 3 years, the assessment reports are now assuming that we'll reach 1.5 degrees 10 years earlier. So we have to literally turn off the taps internationally now in order to have any chance of avoiding that. Now, thinking of turning off the taps are the latest nationally determined contributions. So the NDCs that are taking us, have been brought in under the Paris Accord in 2015. And these NDCs from over 100 governments, if all of the NDCs are followed, we will still see an increase in carbon emissions by 2030 of 16%. That is an increase when we actually need to be seeing a decrease by 45% in order to keep us under 1.5 degrees. So is it an emergency? It's an absolutely massive critical emergency. And everything that you're seeing by the UN and everything that's done by the IPCC is already a matter of compromise. Hundreds of scientists, and even before the reports come out, 49 governments had actually gone in and commented on them, and wording had been changed. The science hadn't been changed, but quite a lot of the wording around the urgency of the situation or the urgency for action was changed. In terms of methane at the moment, methane is the gas which is the problem in the short term. It's 84, 82, 85 times more warming over the next decade or two when it goes into the atmosphere than CO2. And our critical period is right now, over the next few years, over the next decade or two. That methane is being released from a lot of sources. The methane being released by man is mainly coming from agriculture and from our beef and from our dairy farming. But also there are tipping points which can be crossed, which potentially will release an enormous amount of methane. Underneath the Arctic ice shelves is frozen methane, and there's methane in the permafrost. And as these thaw, it gets released into the atmosphere. Now, scientists believe that some point between 1.5 and 2 degrees, the Arctic ice shelves will melt. They will start to release vast amounts of methane. And one study is suggesting that the Siberian ice shelf could release up to 8% of its methane at that point in time. That 8% on its own, from another study done by some MIT scientists, suggests it could warm the planet on its own by 1.2 degrees. Now, I don't want to say that we take these reports from these individual scientists as the Bible, but what we must think is, do we want to take that risk? But that might actually happen at some point in the future, even if it's only being suggested by a couple of scientists. Looking at the carbon budgets, and just prior to lockdowns, we've done a calculation on carbon budgets around the world based on the IPCC assessments of how much carbon budget is left. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, the carbon budget is the budget of carbon we are allowed to keep pumping into the atmosphere that will then not take us over 1.5 degrees. And based on the previous report in 2018 of the IPCC, the amount of carbon left for us at the beginning of that year was about 32 tons a person on the planet. To put that in perspective, the government suggests that people in the UK are emitting 5.5 tons of CO2 a year. The WWF, on the other hand, suggests we're emitting 12 tons per person per year. So either way you look at it, the 32 tons budget isn't very big, and it gives us a very limited time left. And as John was saying at the beginning, every action we take to slow it down gives us a better chance of getting anywhere and gives us a better chance of making the future less bleak than it might be otherwise. Now, just to bring in as well another figure related to what happens in our parishes, is the building of one house, just one house, emits 50 to 80 tons of carbon. So the building of one house and a couple moving into it on their own without any other children, that would be their carbon budget for life already simply by moving into a new house. Okay, just in terms then finishing off on the emergency, and I don't want to scare you even more. I know you've seen a lot of it in the press and that sort of thing, but there's a couple of quotes from politicians. I mean, when John Kerry was talking in Kew Gardens, he called what we're doing the International Suicide Pact. And what I would say is that in both our parish and our county levels, we've got to get out of that suicide pact and start doing everything we can to get ourselves on the right track. Now, Lord Deben was very interesting. He was giving a talk, he was giving a panel discussion on the Financial Times about 3 weeks ago. And I tuned into it just at a particular point. I was a little bit late. And Lord Deben, so that's the head of the Climate Change Committee and a current and a Tory, a Conservative peer in the House of Lords. And Lord Deben said, Extinction Rebellion have got it right. The moment he said that, I looked up and I thought, gosh, I can't believe that. So what quite is he meaning? Then he went about the extinction bit. And then to summarize what he said he can't believe that we've taken big action on COVID, and we took it because we could see the people literally dying in front of us. And he said, his words, extinction is coming. So, and he said, when are we going to get up and take the big action? Only when we start seeing people dying in front of us? Those are very strong words coming from a Conservative member of the House of Lords. Okay, I thought I might now, it is an emergency. We've got to do things about it. And now I could take you through a little bit about what I've been doing over the last couple of years, why I've come to it. And I always start this with a big apology for anybody who's been working on environmental and nature and climate related causes for longer than I have, is I'm very late to the party. I had an ecological conversion in June 2019, and it shook me up and it got me going and it put me on the right track. So this is pretty much what happened. At the start of it was I had this nagging feeling, which a lot of people have when they're thinking about climate and climate change, that I should be doing more. I was one of those people who would say to somebody on the doorstep, I'm doing my bit. I'm doing my recycling. I wash my clothes at a slightly lower temperature, these kind of things. And I had that feeling I really wasn't doing enough. And so I thought about what I could do. So I started on the 3rd of June, No Disposable Cup Day. And the whole point of No Disposable Cup Day, and No Disposable Cup Day now occurs every 4th of October, is to get everybody to move away from using a disposable cup for one day of the year, obviously with the intention that they'll then move on to take other actions afterwards. And the background is that in the UK, we use about 7 million disposable cups a day. 500,000 of them we simply drop on the floor. And they're extremely difficult to recycle because they're a mixture of paper and plastic put together. I mean, the amount of recycling or the amount of disposable cups used every year would actually be a mound bigger than the Albert Hall. And that's in the UK, just so that we can have a 5-minute fix of caffeine on our way to work or whatever it is, without sitting to take it in a cup. I've always thought that's absolutely and utterly ridiculous. Why can't we just sit there and have a nice cup of coffee, or take a reusable cup, or change our habits to more like the Italian style of going in and getting a quick shot of caffeine and then moving on a few seconds later on? But it seems to be absolutely useless. So I started No Disposable Cup Day, and it launched on the 4th of October. And I just now want to show you one little result of it, which happened about the day before No Disposable Cup Day. Now I'm hoping that I will get this, and I will get the. Right, I'm going to share my screen, and I apologise for this. Right. Okay. Now, could people then put thumbs up if you can hear the volume on this when it's playing? I'm going to start it now. Can you hear the volume?
Thank you. What's this? Whoop, whoop, whoop.
No disposable cups.
Okay, so that was the result of our first campaign. So Boris Johnson getting a disposable cup taken out of his hand. And in fact, our campaign, which was just a couple of volunteers doing an hour or so a week on social media, Channel 4 picked up this particular video of Boris, put on logos about No Disposable Cup, and just put it out all over the airwaves and social media. But what the real effect was on my life is I started to be open to all the information about climate and the environment. And I ended up reading a lot more reports. I wasn't flicking over them in the newspapers, rushing to read about the rugby results or Manchester United on the next page. And I was really absorbing them. And then about 3 weeks later on, I had a nightmare. So I had a dream in which I was at home and I was having a coffee in the living room of my semi-detached in Hazlemere. And my two sons, who are at the time were 10 and 12, and in my dream, they're about 30 years of age. And they come back to my house and they open the door and they're in their army kit and they throw down their green army bags into the hall. And then they come in to see me in the living room. And they come in and they tell me that they've just come back from Europe where they've been shooting people to stop them getting the drinking water. And they say to me that they're shooting poorer people with smaller guns. And the only reason they're not getting killed themselves is because they've got better equipment, flak jackets, and bigger guns. And they say to me that they're doing it so that I can maintain my luxury lifestyle in Britain. And they say, you knew about this, didn't you, Dad, 20 years ago? And what did you do about it? And I woke up at the time with tears streaming down my face, and I was mouthing the words, but I have a mortgage, but I have a job, but I have to look after you. And as my feet touched the floor next to my bed, I knew that just wasn't good enough. So from that day, I started campaigning to try and get the world onto the right place. And I stopped pretty much my job, and I've been doing all things related in climate from that point. One of the first things I came across was the scientists' warnings. I will mention that again a bit at the end of this, which are 3 major warnings to humanity. One issued in 1992, one issued in 2017, and one issued in 2019. Now, these 3 warnings don't really tell you much more than you already know. They are urgent warnings from scientists telling us we're on a collision course with the biosphere. The first warning, though, was issued by 1,700 scientists, including more than half the Nobel Prize winners in science. And that was issued at a time just before email, so that's a lot of scientists endorsing it. The second warning, 25 years later on, said that the scientists in the first warning had got it right. We'd ignored them. We hadn't done anything, and the situation was worse than they'd suggested. And that was issued, though, by 15,500 scientists. Now, I wouldn't mind betting that there's probably no more than 1 or 2 people on this Zoom call that have actually heard of the warnings and read them, but 15,500 scientists endorsed this. And then on the 5th of November 2019, there was the World Scientists' Warning of a Climate Emergency issued by 11,500 scientists. To me, this was momentous, that there could be a paper out there, the most endorsed paper in the world, and I hadn't even heard about it, telling us what we should be doing and what the danger was. So I then sat outside the Houses of Parliament with some friends, and they recorded me reading all of the names, which was about 18,000 by that point, of the second warning. And it was on the day that Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. We streamed it live online. I then decided that I was looking at the general election, which was coming up, and deciding whether or not there's something I could do on the general election. And it was driving one of my sons to school when he just turned to me and he said, oh, look, stop talking so much, stand in the election and go and tell everybody what you think. So I did. So I stood in the general election in Wickham, and I stood with only one particular policy, and that was Climate Action Now. And I turned the whole election into a discussion of climate and environment. And Steve Baker, who's unfortunately more of a climate denier now, but when Steve came on and did his thank you speeches as he won the election, he mentioned immediately about environment and climate being a major issue. And in many of his interviews since then, he's talked about it as well. Now, post the election, I then started taking some more personal action, which I will then share with you. I became a TikToker. So I'm assuming everybody here probably knows about TikTok from their teenage sons, daughters, or grandchildren. Well, I started TikToking, and I'm gonna, oops, hang on, sorry. To just get the right screen. Sorry, let me see. Okay, I'll stop my share, I'll start again. Right, give me 1 second, my apologies. Okay, right. Okay. Share screen now.
Look forward to those, aren't we, David? Morning, can I get 2 donuts, please, in my carton there, please, no waste. And then a hot chocolate, please, in my reusable cup.
Yep, anything else for you?
No, that'll be it. Thank you very much for today. There's one. Oh, yum. Looking forward to those, aren't we, David? That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much for all of that. Brilliant.
I'm just going to show you one more.
So, got my bread from Tesco with no wrapping again. Everything else covered in plastic or paper and plastic, and this is without wrapping. It can be done. Just take a bag in with you and ask them, and they'll give it to you straight away.
Okay.
Got my bread.
Stop the share. Right. So what I started doing is I decided that I had to start telling people about how to live without using waste, and I picked takeaways. So I haven't had a takeaway of any sort for 2 years now, taking any waste at all from any takeaway. I go to McDonald's with my family. We take all our own boxes in, our own spoons, reusable cups, even for the ice cream, and we have it without waste. The first video you saw there got 612,000 views, and it's still going up. And the second one, I think, is about 70,000. But the whole point is we can do this, and we just have to inspire people into taking changes, making changes with their lives. Now, since the general election, the next really main thing is that I moved then on to forming a charity for Scientists Warning Europe. So we created a charity here. Another charity was formed in America with the target of driving science-led action on the climate crisis, and particularly driving awareness of the major scientists' warnings. We've run a number of events. We've issued a letter signed by scientists to Boris Johnson that was covered in Sky News and various other places. And we have continued to take action. And we're now coming up to our COP26 action. And in COP26, what we've done is we have had 15 scientists from around the world, including British scientists, writing effectively a 4th major warning. And that warning is now up to be signed by all scientists. So hearing, John, that you're a geologist, you've definitely got to go and sign the warning. And it's not just by scientists in the sense of natural sciences. So it's social sciences, political sciences, engineers. We want everybody with anything related to science to sign it. And it's already being signed, for instance, by Martin Tett. Sorry, I've seen something come on screen, by Sir David King. And Sir David King has signed it with hundreds and hundreds of other scientists. And we are this afternoon doing a major push to try and get dozens and dozens more volunteers so that we can contact people in every single country of the world to get them to sign it. And I will just then again briefly bring up that screen so you can see it. And here we go. Hang on. Share didn't come up. So this is our website now, and this is the new warning. And people can sign it by coming here. So please do, John, while you're getting bored listening to me here, go and sign it. And anybody else who's a scientist, please do. So it's scientistwarningeurope.org.uk. Now, that's the actions that I've been taking up until now. Then on the 5th of May, I was in the unitary elections for Buckinghamshire Council, and I stood in Hazlemere in a heavily conservative area. And it's not a thing about being anti-conservative. I'm not remotely political, and I, oddly enough, probably be more conservative if it wasn't for climate than I might with the other parties. But I stood in a heavily conservative area and defeated the Conservative councillors. And that was on the basis that I had only one policy. So my leaflet said, climate action now. And Hazlemere voted me in with that one simple message, which is extraordinary. And you wouldn't have imagined that that could have been done if you went back 5 or 10 years. It shows where we've come in terms of our awareness and our worry about what's happening with climate. It's worth mentioning as well that during that, and I think it was John talking about the youth, it may have been Len, but the youth are worried about what's going on with climate, but in fact, they aren't the most worried. So all of the surveys show that the older age groups are more worried. It's not wildly different, but it might be 82% or 85% of the older age groups are very worried about climate emergency, whereas it might be 75 for the younger age groups. And so actually what you'll find in almost all of your parishes is it's not as the newspapers say. The pensioners and the older people are much, much more worried and terrified. And whether this is because they're worried for their grandchildren and their children, whether it's because they feel a bit guilty, whether it's because they feel vulnerable, I don't know. I haven't probably gone into that detail. Although many people do mention trying to leave a world that their children and grandchildren can live in. So we've got to remember that although youth are extremely important, the pensioners and the older people are even more worried. And what they're looking for, and what I found in Hazlemere, and we have experienced since we declared, is they're looking for leadership. And they're looking for us, the people they elected, assuming you were elected, and if you weren't elected, the people that wanted to assume the role, the leadership role, to show them leadership. And you don't have to be Churchill to do that. You just have to start making positive steps forward. And in Hazlemere, since declaring our climate emergency, which was at the beginning of 2020, so we declared a climate emergency, we set a 2030 net zero target for the community, and we decided to start a working party. That was what we decided in our first meeting. And I probably should go back and just say, the only reason this happened, at least at the time it happened, because Hazlemere was already quite positive, was because the other Hazlemere in Surrey, I happened to bump into a Green Party parish councillor from the other Hazlemere in Surrey, who said to me, if you want to do something about climate, why don't you join the parish council? They might have a space for co-option, and try to declare a climate emergency. So I did, and then this is where we are today. So we declared the climate emergency, and then we set up the climate emergency working party, which we decided to have running every single week from the start of when we declared. Now, it was very ambitious to do that, but the idea was we want to give it the opportunity to get some momentum going. And for the first 2 or 3 months, it was pretty much me and one other councillor turning up most of the time. And then gradually, through word of mouth, we got more and more residents on it. Now, on our list for the climate emergency working party that we tell about the meetings now every week, we probably have about 25 people. It's still really the same 5, 10 people that turn up to every meeting, but we have others that are interested and do take part in a number of the projects. We decided in the first meeting that we wouldn't start with a plan for getting to net zero 2030. And some of you may well have done that, and I would love to hear about you, particularly if you've had success with it, because we started that only a month or two ago. What we decided to do at the beginning was take action, throw some mud at the wall, see what would stick, get some things going, and seeing if we could get some community spirit and involvement going with it, rather than going straight onto what is a complicated and daunting potential plan and try and do that at the beginning. So we then got on with our actions, and we looked at what we could do with nature, and then with plans for getting the parish council itself to net zero. And we put together a plan as a working party, and a lot of the things I'm telling you aren't necessarily agreed by the parish council. They may be under discussion, but they're coming out of the working party. So we created the plan for getting the parish council to net zero, and that involved, number one, getting a green energy supplier. And if you haven't done that yet, that's the simplest, easiest way to start moving towards net zero. There are discussions about whether they're all truly green, so you will have to do your research, but that was the first thing we did for our parish council. We then got a smart meter put in so that we could track what was happening with our electricity, and the next stages are going to include batteries, solar panels, and heat pumps in varying stages. And as I say, they still have to be fully fleshed out and agreed and paid for as we go along. And the intention, though, is to start with batteries. If we're looking at the issues now with current energy and that sort of thing, the idea is then to charge up our batteries during the night when it's cheaper, but also when there's more wind power, and the wind power is a larger part of the power going into the grid, so there's more green energy going into the grid. We're also looking at doing it at both of our building locations, but they would have EV charge points go in at the same time. We've been looking at projects called solar streets. I'm sure some of you actually done it or have been looking at it. Solar streets have come here and looked at our buildings. They've been looking at the buildings, both in doing a direct project for us on the parish council, but also in what we can do with the community. A neighbouring group, which we cooperate with a lot in Wickham, has launched a solar streets project. So they've already got a number of sign-ups for it. And that is effectively where the company is providing a sort of community discount, because you get a minimum number of sign-ups to put solar panels onto the roof of your houses. So if you get 10 houses, they'll then give you a very, very good price for doing it, on the basis they can come and do all the houses consecutively and save on their costs. We've then been looking at community energy schemes. So we'd like to start a community energy scheme here. And we've had in an assessment of all of the solar panels and installations that could be put onto all of the school buildings and library buildings to see what kind of energy could be generated from those, and had an offer of a PPA, which is an offer that solar panels are put in. You have a fixed price then, which would generally be lower than what you're paying, than what would be paid if you bought it directly from the grid. And that fixed price is paid to the supplier of the solar panels. And after a period, 10 or 15 years, the contract runs out and the solar panels are then owned by the institution that installed them, but with no upfront cost from that institution. Our 2030 plan is being worked on now. So now we've got a group of residents together, a sustainability consultant, an engineer, a project manager, and they're now working on our 2030 plan in order to present it over the next 2 or 3 months to the parish council for discussion. So that's being done right now, but it's all being done by residents. We immediately started advanced recycling. So we went to TerraCycle. We asked for what schemes TerraCycle had left to do, and we started 5 advanced recycling schemes. And it's just for items that are much more difficult to recycle, and it's very granular. So marigold, gloves, rubber gloves, Hasbro games. But these things, at least it generated interest, and in the games, we got quite a few games in, and it's still working. But the recycling team has then moved on. We're now doing extra drop-off points. So we have 2 drop-off points. We're starting to do blister packs, coffee pods, crisp packets, and we're encouraging people now to use the new Co-op soft plastic waste recycling, because we have 2 of them in our parish, and so we're directing people to go and do that. We've created a project on food waste awareness. We've had people standing outside the local supermarkets talking about food waste and what can be done. We've also had paintings created by local children on food waste. We've introduced the Hazlemere climate talks. So every Monday, first Monday of the month at 6 o'clock, we have a climate talk, and half of these have to be locally related topics. Half could be anything, because people may be interested in what's happening on the Arctic ice shelf, but other them have to be directly related. So we've had a heat pump discussion by the director of the National Heat Pump Association. We've done nappy libraries, and we've had a presentation locally from a local planner on how neighbourhood plans can fight climate change. We've had the head of Buckinghamshire Council's Climate and Environment Group come and present on the climate change strategy for the county. We've had one of the directors of Greatmore, which is a waste heat facility, not necessarily environmentally friendly, and in fact causes a vast amount of carbon emissions. But the point was to bring them down so we could discuss it and understand where our waste was going and question them on it. We had climate emergency declarations for parish councils explained by Climate Emergency UK. We had a talk very recently on passive house and passive house again in neighbourhood plans. We've had a talk about bees, and we've done it on community energy as well, one of the first talks we had. These talks are open to anybody, and we offer them to all of the other local areas, although you're also welcome to come as well yourselves, so that none of the other local groups that are doing climate work need to set up talks for themselves. They can just join ours at the same time every month, give us suggestions, and we all do it, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've started a repair cafe. So the repair cafe, actually, its first day will be tomorrow. So, and I've seen that some of the parishes in Warwickshire already have repair cafes, which is great. And we'd probably like to benefit from your experience, but we're starting that tomorrow, and that comes out of the work we were doing on recycling. Is the same people were then interested in starting the repair cafe. So we've got our insurance, we've got joined to the Repair Cafe Association, we've got all of our volunteers now to do the repairs. And that will be going ahead tomorrow for the first time in our community centre. And it's being linked with what's happening in Marlow and in Wickham, so that we will now have a repair cafe at exactly the same time on Saturdays, different Saturdays of the month. And we hope that another parish or town will join us in the local area. So there's one happening absolutely every month in the local area, and there's always somewhere for people to go. Trees. Now, biodiversity is probably even more important than issues related to climate change. And on trees, the absolute number one thing we can all be doing, and it's in the recent scientists' warning that we're bringing out for COP26, is keep the trees in the ground. Every mature tree has to be kept in the ground. If you are commenting on planning applications, comment that you don't want trees taking out. Comment if it might be near to a tree and disturb its roots. Those trees are what are going to defend us when we get the Canadian heat waves. And the Canadian heat waves will come. We will get them. And any tree we plant today is not going to come to help us for 20 to 30 years. And on carbon sequestration, even after 30 years, it's probably doing a quarter to a third of the job of a fully mature tree that's got its roots in the ground today. So protect those trees in any way you can. Now, what we have been doing is we have also got some residents now who formed a bit of a tree protection order group. So they now will walk onto certain areas and they'll look at the large trees that are there, the bigger trees that are there currently, and then they'll apply for tree protection orders. Now, I'm not saying we're being hugely successful, and the first batch didn't get them accepted, but we're going to keep trying. We have talked to the arboriculturalists at Bucks Council, who have actually said to us that, you know, we should keep putting in orders every time we think there is an issue with a tree. And when we're trying to put in these orders, you put in an order based on the tree having the possibility of being cut down, so being in danger, but also on its amenity value to the community. An amenity value now is changing. So you can put in climate change considerations, adaptation to heat waves, carbon dioxide sequestration, oxygen provision, because those are amenity values to the local community. How your local council views them, firstly, will be different in every council, and secondly, will change over time. And I can't say outright that this is what they said, but the indication from those in Buckinghamshire was the more applications we get in that are suggesting this is important, the likely weight of it will go up in the future. So we're trying on tree protection, and we're also trying on tree planting. So Hazlemere Parish Council, like many of you, has planted trees in the past and has a programme to look after its trees. But we've also we also have a pair of residents, hopefully it will expand, who are walking the streets, looking at the verges we have. And we're in our particular village, we have quite a lot of classic verges with grass verges running along on the pathways. They're looking at the verges to determine where a tree could go. So where it isn't going to be in the way of utilities, where it can be not obstructive to people, not going to cause danger at a crossing. And then when we've got all those areas, we've been asked by the arboriculturalists at Bucks Council to send it to them, and they'll tell us the type of trees that would be good to go in there. And at that point, then we will look at the costs of putting them in and maintaining them. And also the recommendations of the arboriculturalists are that we look for families to effectively sponsor a tree. So a tree being put out in a verge near your house, and the family says, we'll look after it, we'll water it, we'll keep it going, and then we would instruct them on how to do it. So we formed a youth group, and I have people talking about youth. It was, again, like pulling teeth trying to get it started, a bit like the Working Party. You just had to keep turning up and keep telling people until they came. Now, eventually, we've got a small youth group going with a number of enthusiastic volunteers, which is great because now we have their input on things we do. But also, they have picked up a project. They're looking at trying to get beehives put into all the local schools. So they're coming up with a plan. Actually, there is one school that had some beehives that hadn't been used. And then there is a very nice private school in Wickham that has beehives as an example of how they're running. And the idea is to bring these things together and try and get beehives going as well. But it's great that the youth group is now running. And we've then been looking at putting in wildflower meadows, and we put our first wildflower meadow in. And we are, I suppose, a semi-urban parish, but the housing is basically bunched all together. We don't have country lanes or anything like that. So it's very much town organisation. So on a number of our roads, we will have areas of grass sandwiched in between housing. And in a U-shaped area of housing, we put in a wildflower meadow. When the parish councillors approached every door, knocked on and asked everybody if they like it, and everybody said yes, except one. There is always one, of course. And we put the wildflower meadow in, and the first one, we took all the grass off, put the wildflowers down, and it didn't work very well the first time. So we had to replant. And as you know, the weather this year hasn't been terribly conducive to wildflowers pegging it and starting to grow. So we had to redo it, and then it did work. And now everyone seems reasonably happy, and the plan is to expand the wildflower meadows. Now with that, we started a project called B Squared. B Squared, and it's going from the children's idea of, don't be square, all the adults are square, so don't be square, but B Squared, BEE, and the idea is to help our pollinators. And you may not know, but our pollinators have been decimated. So, a close colleague of mine, Professor Dave Goulson from Surrey University, when he does a talk on insects and pollinators, his talk is entitled The Insect Apocalypse. When he talks about the problems of biodiversity, and he often follows on talks, the scientists that are talking about climate change, and they're saying 2030 is the absolute latest date for net zero if we really want to save ourselves. And he comes on and says, if you thought that was bad, this is worse. And the date for getting the biodiversity right is 2025. We have to do it right now, stopping use of pesticides and everything else. But when you talk about the insects, the bees, the pollinators, so the bees, the butterflies, and the moths, they have been absolutely decimated. The World Wildlife Fund estimates there are 17 bee species in the UK that are regionally extinct. Why are they regionally extinct? Well, that means that there may be a bee species in Wales that is actually going quite well in Wales, and it's not going to be in Buckinghamshire or in Warwickshire. Why? Because we've had a problem here with weather. They've been wiped out, and then suddenly they can't repopulate because there's too much concrete, monoculture agriculture, lawns or housing in between, and they can't get from one place to the other. So what can we do to help them? It's create pollinator corridors, and it's the easiest thing to do. So on B Squared, what we did is we decided, and the Wickham Environmental Group was with us, we bought seeds. So we bought enough wildflower seeds for all 4,500 houses that we have in Hazlemere. We then, with volunteers, we put them into little envelopes, and we created a leaflet and a little poster. And this is our little poster. So that's the little poster we had. And the little poster was put out, and on the back are the instructions for the project. And it went out with a little packet of seeds with instructions on it. And we distributed that to every single house in Hazlemere. So they all got one. Volunteers did it. We had a rush of volunteers wanting to do it. We had about 50 volunteers who helped in the end. There were probably more than 100 who volunteered. And it went out to every house. It's gone wild on social media. About every 20th house has put up a sign saying they're part of the project. And this is all just in year one. We've won an award for the best community project in our area. And now we're being copied by something like 20 local parishes. So 3 community boards, that's the organisation in Buckinghamshire, so the sort of in between us and the unitary authority, are doing it for all of the parishes and towns in their area. The cost of doing it was only 28p per household. It was absolutely minuscule. But not only that, it cost us nothing. As soon as we got it organised, we went out, and you may be able to see just at the bottom there, the sponsors. Within literally one day, we got 3 sponsors for it, and it was all paid for. So it cost the parish council nothing. Everybody loved it, and we're being copied by everybody. We're even now talking amongst a number of people if we can do it county-wide, absolutely as soon as possible. And why don't we do it nationally? I mean, I was talking with NALC yesterday about, is this something that NALC could be helping? Why can't WALC do it? Why don't we do it in the whole of Warwickshire? I mean, it's so easy and so cheap, and everyone loves it, and it is essential. The quote from Einstein is, if the bees go, man goes in 4 years' time. And the stats is that we don't have any pollinators. That's 40% of our crops that will have to be manually pollinated by us or will not grow. So it's enormously important. Okay, probably just the last thing that I'd lead into just on this is the other effect of climate change and climate emergency declarations at parish council level is on planning. So we mention it regularly in our planning application discussions. So we will regularly talk about the fact that Hazlemere has declared a climate emergency, has a 2030 net zero target, and that the building of this particular house will affect it by being so much concrete and so many emissions in its building. We regularly put in that we have a stated policy of creating pollinator corridors and protecting pollinators. And we actually then say that we want to keep them protected. And this particular thing where somebody wants to take out hedgerow or destroy another open area is not going to be something that we want to support in Hazlemere. And we state it, and we state that weight should be given to that by the planning officers. But more than that, we're doing a neighbourhood plan. Now, some of you will have neighbourhood plans already, some will be doing them, some will be updating them, and some may be thinking of it. What I would say if you're thinking about it is go ahead and get on with it. It is pretty much from my limited experience with my two hats on, as John says, it's pretty much the limit or the best way that a parish council can take an effect on these things and affect issues related to both climate change and biodiversity. So in doing ours, we're rushing one through because we have two major developments coming on, and we want to try and impose some restrictions on those developments as quickly as we can. And we are one of the very controversial developments where a piece of greenbelt was taken out by the Wickham plan, which covers us, and one of those developments is going on it. So we're rushing through the neighbourhood plan. In addition, on the neighbourhood plan, we are aiming to raise the standards. So what we want to do, and this is not agreed, there's a huge community process. The first community meeting is coming up in a week or so, but in discussion is whether or not we should really allow any building on a green open space at all, anywhere, whether we should look at densification and infilling. And in fact, again, the latest scientist warning paper that we're bringing out, that is saying the way to do building now is to densify. We have to put it into areas that are already concreted or tarmacked, rather than destroy biodiversity in open areas, which also causes flood damage. And then we're also looking at whether or not we can require that every new house would be passive house standard, so built to the highest standards in terms of emissions after it's been built. So with effectively a sealed envelope that makes it very easy to heat, and even looking at extensions being passive house. So all of this has come out of our climate emergency declaration, and within our neighbourhood plan principles is the fact that we've made a climate emergency declaration. I think I'd probably finish now and just say that our experience on the climate emergency, we had nothing negative at all. All the members of the community have been positive, and the number one thing they were when we talked to them is they go, we're so worried about what national government and county council are doing, and we're so pleased that we're in an area where we're taking action, and we're pleased we've got leadership and people trying to do things. So really it's about showing some leadership to local people, which they really, really want from their parish council, because in these dark times, they can't relate to what's happening at the higher levels and they feel they can't affect it. But if things are happening locally, they do really want to join in. And I'd probably leave you with a sort of couple of quotes then, just to finish off. So it's not just me. And the first one from Henry Kissinger, that the task of the leader is to get people from where they are to where they've not been. And to some extent in the local area, we all think it's impossible to do these things, but it isn't. Once we get started, every step leads to another one, or to another person joining the group, or to another new idea. And then I think something that all of us should think about is Churchill's quote. And that's when we're thinking about in our living rooms in 5 or 10 years' time and being taken on by our grandchildren or children about what we've been doing about the climate crisis locally. And we don't want to be saying that we didn't do it because we didn't have the power or we were uncomfortable. So, and Churchill said that history is going to be kind to him because he's going to write it. And I really believe that parish council level, we have the opportunity to write history for our areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. That was an amazing talk, coming from global right down to the very local level. I think I'm going to have to replay this recording about 5 times to pick up all the facts that you've been including.
But great. Well, I hope I got them right then.
I understand that our president has now managed to join the meeting. Yes. So at this point, I'll hand it over to him to start to deal with the question period.
Yes.
Thanks very much,
Great.
Ed.
John, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Could I give my apologies to Ed and to all for my late arrival? It was a technical glitch, as they say. I realized all too late that the email setting up the link hadn't reappeared on my iPad, which I always use for the sound purpose, but that's another story, another day. Ed, I enjoyed your presentation very much indeed. You have achieved great things thus far. Could I put a first point to you, if I may?
Of course.
We know about the international conferences coming up at Glasgow and elsewhere. How do we all stop these events being used to just drive a roller coaster, or almost to be a popularity contest for the world leaders involved? I mean, there is a lot of concern, as you know, but it seems that those who are supporting your views do have an opportunity to make sure that becomes for real and not just tomorrow's headline in the newspaper.
Yes, I mean, obviously, this is what we all think about all the time, and we all feel powerless. I think even I feel powerless, and I'm going to COP26 leading our delegation. The real power to solve everything is really in the hands of about 20 people. You know, it really is the G20 leaders, and amongst that, 2 or 3 of them have the most power, but certainly the others are hugely important as well, and we need them to do things. What can we as ordinary people do? Well, I mean, a plug for what we're doing, because we want volunteers for the next week to 3 weeks. So people really who are here really want to have an effect and want to do something for COP26. What we're trying to do now is reach out over these next few weeks to get the most scientists in the world to sign our paper in order to cut through and have the most people. So people can join us, and I'm happy with the details at the end of that. Otherwise, it's definitely writing to people and writing now. You know, it's definitely writing to the Times. It's definitely writing to the FT, and do those letters and don't not do them. You know, don't think that they won't come in. I do know a guy locally to here who writes pretty much every week to the FT, or to the Times. But in the last 3 years, he's had 3 letters printed. You know, if you keep doing it, it does have an effect.
Yeah.
We've got to talk to, I mean, you know, approaches to Alok Sharma. And again, it sounds useless, but the more letters they get, it has an effect. I think we all know that, as we're all politicians at one level, is once you have people shouting, you do notice. You notice the people that are shouting loudest. Those who are going to Glasgow, obviously it's the point of trying to intercept people and trying to press the views on them, but it is very, very hard. I mean, we've got to get, for a politician, and this is a little bit the same for some parishes, but you know, it's very difficult. If the politicians do nothing, they will be vilified in the future now, absolutely vilified. But if they take the real action that's going to save us, and that's probably a 2030 net zero target, is real action to do it, and the equivalent of biodiversity, that will make all of our lives uncomfortable for a period of time.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to face short-term pressure on them. So they're between a rock and a hard place. So I have sympathy, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be stepping up as leaders and taking a sort of Gandhi-esque or Churchill view of it and getting on with it. And that's what we need to get them to do. They've got to stand up and do the right thing.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any further questions? If you could put your finger up, please.
There were a couple of questions in the chat. Mainly asking questions about, there was one question about your bee campaign flyer and whether that logo could be used wider, if people could use that logo.
I'm hoping to say yes, and I have actually asked the lady who drew it up for us, who said yes. But all I'm saying is that I've asked her to write an email to me confirming that before I can send it to everybody, because the worst thing I want to do is send it to everybody and suddenly she changes her mind. So as soon as I have my sticky paws on a written email, then it's open to everybody.
Good.
Okay, we have one hand up. Before we address Jenny, Barbara Bland has asked, I'm listening with interest to climate solutions, including planting trees, protecting trees, wildlife corridors, improving our biodiversity, introducing wildlife meadows, hedgerows, etc. How can parish councils protect their green belt, historic woodlands, biodiversity when we are in HS2 boundaries? And we have had no success with petitions to safeguard our green corridors and woodlands. Our ancient woodlands and green belt are destroyed, and it will take 50 years plus to recover.
Oh gosh, Barbara, the shiver goes down my spine as I hear it. And I was up at Calvert Green in Buckinghamshire looking at the utter destruction of Calvert Green all the way around it. And we see it everywhere in Buckinghamshire as well. There is no one here who supports HS2. You've got to play the long game, and you've got to do what you can. So you've got to use every single tool at your disposal. And I'm afraid to say the tools are pretty limited as far as I can work out. But certainly it's doing your TPOs on every tree you can. Certainly it's opposing every different thing, whether it's on air quality or whatever else you can. Certainly it is declaring your climate emergency if you're in an area, setting your own net zero targets, setting your own biodiversity targets so you can use them to give weight in other things when you say it. You've got to put pressure on the MPs, particularly, and I don't know Warwickshire's raft of MPs, but if you've got Conservative MPs, they will already be out against HS2. But also we've seen what happened in Chesham and Amersham, where the Conservative MP got literally wiped out because of HS2 and planning. So again, put massive pressure on the MPs, and also we've got to put pressure on for net zero targets at the highest level as well. If we had a 2030 net zero target for the UK, HS2 would be out the window. I mean, it's a massive amounts of carbon emissions. And I agree, it makes my heart break what we're doing to the woodlands, as well as the fact that it's not just 50 years to put them back. I mean, historic woodlands are hundreds of years to put them back. 50 years may get them back to a level of carbon sequestration, which is 67%, 60 to 70% of what it was before, but it's still woeful. I don't have any good thoughts for you on that. Anything I can do to help, though, or some more ideas, please get in contact.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, Jenny has a hand up.
Jenny,
So, Jenny.
Oh, thank you. I think in this area, the Stratford town has actually started all sorts of bits and pieces, getting things beginning to move forward, and a lot of our parishes around are working on all sorts of things, which you've mentioned. And the county has actually put up money for Green Shoots local projects, which is really, really good.
Yes.
The problem is, I mean, I'm quite involved with it. It's having the energy to actually bring all this together and make sure it kind of happens. We've got lots of stuff that you kind of want to do. And when you actually want to make it happen, there's always a price tag to it as well. So you've actually got to look for where the money's coming from. Where do we get the resources of energy across groups of people to keep this momentum going, or actually to get things off the ground?
You've got to go out to the community, and as I said, you heard me raise my eyebrows at the point of starting both our groups, both the Working Party and the Youth Group. Both of them didn't look like they were going to work. We did really meet for 10 to 12 weeks with myself, with 1.5 other parish councillors, turning up until we got community coming in. And the way we got the community in was word of mouth. It wasn't putting it on Facebook or anything else like that. So we got a bit of interest, and that may have helped when we talked to somebody. But once we talked to a few people and they passed us on, then we got people in. And we've done various walkabouts and things, both on the neighbourhood plan and on other things, where we get to talk to people about it, and these attract people in. And then you find you get your core, okay? And it's just like the parish council. You end up with another core of good volunteers who are all prepared to turn up like all of us. And they start coming, and you've got to make it a bit fun. So it's good to go out for a drink and a coffee as well and relieve it, because there tends to be a lot of doom and gloom when you look at the problem. And then you've got to get some stuff going forward. And so, you know, the momentum is maintained by having some successes. I mean, B Squared is such a success locally that every time we talk about every other new initiative, we refer back to that we made it a success, and that spurs us on to the next thing. But you have to be determined. And I think for us, that's the leadership bit is, you know, every time I feel like giving up because no one's turned up and I'm on the Zoom meeting on my own, I redouble my, after a brief tear and a quiet beer in the evening, I then redouble my effort to make sure somebody's there next time, and it works. And in the end, the cascade comes. So there's no easy thing for it. Word of mouth and holding on to those lovely volunteers that do turn up.
Thank you.
Thank you. John? I think John has a question.
I was just thinking about HS2 and green corridors, and this has only just occurred to me, but you get houses these days with green roofs. What is the potential for having green bridges over the HS2 route and create the green, try to maintain some aspect of a green corridor that way?
I mean, you know, great idea, well above my pay grade, knowing how green roofs would work on bridges, John. Sounds like a fantastic idea. Absolutely no idea how it would work. And I think it's wonderful. I do, though, think it's one of those wonderful ideas that is putting a sticky plaster onto a massive broken leg. And that what we really, all of us, and we have to keep getting everybody going against HS2, to be honest, until it stops. There will come a point where it's tipped over. And then actually it'll be better to finish it. But still, at the moment, we've just got to try to get them to change their mind.
There's before we finish up, there's a lot of people asking, Ed, if you have any resources that you can share. A couple of people have specifically said, can the neighbourhood plan be shared as a working example on what is possible? And all sorts of people are asking if you can share any resources that you've talked about today.
I've just put my email into the chat, so you're welcome to email me. Although a quick warning, unless you're emailing to volunteer to help us on our journey to COP26, don't expect a response for 3 weeks. And feel free to remind me in 3.5 weeks' time, because I'm totally maxed out on that. But please do just email me. And on the neighbourhood plan, we'll share everything we've done on it. I'm sure there's those in Warwickshire who've already advanced it, but everything we've done, and as we move forward. We do have Hazlemere Climate Action now. I can't remember what the actual thing is. Hazlemere Climate Action, or Hazlemere Can, is a website created by the Working Party, but it's run just by one of the volunteers. And in fact, the principle of that is to be a resource for all local groups on climate action. So again, the Wickham group has joined us. It looks like Downley will probably join us if they get going as well. And we should be gradually getting more resources on there, but a bit like it was Jenny asking the question about keeping it all going, is you need the volunteers to do it. So unless you've got a volunteer who's available all the time to update it, it tends to be up and then not be updated for a month or two.
Thank you. Question from Robin, please.
Oh, good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Right. I must apologize, you're not getting a live picture of me. My camera is malfunctioning, but I think you've got an old portrait, which you'll have to do for the time being. Ed, first, I just want to say I have huge admiration for what you're doing.
Thank you.
You should be Prime Minister as far as I'm concerned. Well, really, I'm serious. I'm absolutely serious. We need somebody with your viewpoint and your energy, which is astonishing. Unlike you, I'm an old hippie from the 60s, and I've been involved with the environmental movement, starting with Greenpeace and various others, since Friends of the Earth, Soil Association, and so on and so forth, since the 70s. So I'm 50 years into this journey, and I'm afraid to say that I have a much bleaker view of things than your very optimistic one. And I just want to very briefly just put out there what I'm thinking. I think we have not a climate emergency. I think we have a climate catastrophe on our hands. And to call it an emergency is not really doing it justice. I think Extinction Rebellion, my friends in Extinction Rebellion, are absolutely right. That is the risk that we're running at the moment. And every year that goes by now, I see that as more and more likely, sadly. But unfortunately, at the moment, we have another emergency, which is that we now have a socio-economic emergency as the result of the last 2 years. The double whammy of Brexit and COVID, whatever your opinions are on that subject, right? The double whammy of those two is not only driving us deeper and deeper into national debt, but it's actually positively destroying the fabric of our society at this point in time in all sorts of ways. It's not just the National Health Service that's now a disaster area, it's our supply chains. Almost every aspect of our life is now under threat. And while I admire enormously everything you and your colleagues are doing, my concern, to be brutally frank, is that it's not going to work. I hate to say that, but I think we need to plan for a much more serious scenario, which is social collapse. Food shortages, food riots, the possibility of martial law, all sorts of things that could go very badly wrong in the next 5 or 10 years. And I have to say, for my money, that's a more likely outcome than B corridors saving the day. And so my emphasis, I've just recently joined our parish council in a rural parish of 3,500 people. And my emphasis now is on self-sufficiency. And I just want to put that out there as an idea for people to consider, because I think we have to look at the situations we're going to have to address in 5 or 10 years' time, which could be quite catastrophic. You could have people starving. And therefore, I think self-sufficiency is the only real goal that's worth going for on a parish level. And I'll leave that thought with you.
Can I, we've got time for me to comment on this, have we, Ian?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, that's great. Robin, thank you very much for putting the point of view, and I am not far away from your point of view overall. And I take my hat off to you for what you've been doing and apologize for how late I am to the party. You're absolutely right. And I spend a lot of time hearing what the scientists are saying. And when I was in a talk, in a discussion with a couple of our top scientists, the authors of the paper, Bill Mumau being one of them in America, talking about the latest IPCC report and what it says. And he says, you don't get anything from the summary of the report because that's already altered by the government. So that although the science is right, the language is wrong. You get it when you go to the technical summary underneath it. And he says, very much like you said, that the terrifying thing about it is that the damage has already been done and will not be reversed within any of our lifetimes or within a matter of centuries, and that it's continuing to get worse. And that the problem is, if we don't act now, and this really is as in absolutely now, then when we realize, so when, as Lord Deben said about his Extinction Rebellion one, that we start to see the deaths in front of our eyes, and then we react. And in Britain, that will simply be too late. Because at the point where we're seeing the really bad effects, a bit like your painting, is that there won't be enough other countries in the world to cooperate with us when we really try to do it internationally, because they'll be fighting wars over water, or they'll have desertification leading to mass immigration and migration, or they'll have other collapses going on in those particular countries. So that is the danger, and you're absolutely right, we need to do it now. I am more optimistic in the fact that I believe we can still do it. And I do believe that our particular Prime Minister, because of his unusual way of acting, it doesn't matter whether you're Conservative or Labour or anything else, is it's quite possible that Boris Johnson, with enough pushing by the rest of us from all sides of the political spectrum and all of the community, could go, God, we've got to do this. I want to be Churchill, and I'll really change something, and we'll take a 2030 or an even earlier net zero target and do it. I don't think he will, but I think there's a small chance. And I think you're right about self-sufficiency, and relocalization of everything is definitely the way to go, both from the point of view of reducing the use of energy, reducing carbon emissions, and improving our lives and our sustainability locally. I don't want to put a particularly negative one onto your thought of local self-sufficiency, but the likely result of catastrophic global warming in the next decade or two will be massive migration. It will be, the figures are between 200 million and 1.2 billion, depending on whether you're listening to the World Bank or others. We have 1.2 billion people on the move. And if a lot of those are coming north in Africa, they're going to swarm over Europe, and their favorite places to go to are Britain and Germany. And I'm afraid to say, if it gets as bad as you suggest, which I would like to think, I think it doesn't need to get that bad, but they will swarm across the channel, and anybody who's trying to be self-sufficient will be completely overloaded with migrants coming into their local communities and demanding help, which we should give them. After all, we did start the Industrial Revolution, and we're currently prevaricating about putting anything right.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Can I say, on behalf of WALC, we are so grateful to you for your time, and the one word that strikes me is your energy in this subject, and keep that going if you can. I know how difficult it is, but your talk has been enlightening, invigorating, yes, depressing at times, but that's the nature of the story. And we are extremely grateful. And in a normal case, I would ask our audience to show their applause in the normal way, but thank you very much indeed. This has been a stimulating start to our conference. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and anything I can do to help anybody, please let me know in 3 weeks' time.
Thank you so much. Could I now address delegates? I think we're now having a coffee break of some 10 minutes. and I'm seeking advice from John or Alison as to when we should reconvene.
Yes.
John?
We were reconvening at 11:15, but let's make it 11:20.
Okay.
To give everybody a chance. I will now open the breakout rooms so people can go straight into the breakout rooms, or they